The live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender adaptation is terrible. I know, shocking. Why is no one talking about this? This is why you come to me, to say the things that others won't. No one is talking about this, don't check. But what's interesting, and why I wanted to make this quick little video, though knowing me it'll probably be much longer than I intended, about it, is why it's bad. Because it's terrible in ways that intrigue me for what it indicates about the thinking that went into the series. Because it certainly isn't wokeness that killed it. Well, actually, it kind of is, but not in the way that online outrage merchants who like to put weird googly eye monstrosities in their thumbnails would argue. I swear to God, I am not here to just rage against the show. I actually want to provide a nuanced critique of it. Indeed, at times, it is an improvement over the M. Night Shyamalan disaster, where it took 4 earthbenders doing a mildly choreographed dance to move a simple rock. In fact, the live-action TV show's first scene gives us some kick-ass earthbending action that we all wanted to see. I mean, look at that. It's a little cool. But that's exactly the problem. It looks cool, and that's about all the live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender is going for. It's a simple surface-level nostalgic resurrection of Avatar the animated series without actually adding to or building on top of what the original had to say. Its surface-level approach to necromantically recreate the past not only adds nothing new, but ultimately lets the show run entirely counter to the main nuanced anti-colonialist worldview that the original series was trying to present. Also, it did the most unforgivable thing. It made my adorable problematic boy Sokka insufferable and Uncle Iroh boring as hell. Unforgivable. You go in the corner and think about what you've done, Netflix. You know. I hope that I can show you the entire problem with the live-action remake without spoiling the entire season, as you can see the issues underlying the entire series on full display within critical decisions made in its first 2 episodes, that ultimately reveal why I find this live-action Avatar adaptation not only pointless, but actively counterintuitive to the original series. That said, I will briefly touch upon some issues that occur in later episodes, so spoiler warning overall, but I'm mainly going to be focusing on the first 2 episodes. The first one I want to dive into is one that most people were even concerned about before the series released, and the series coming out didn't just prove those concerns correct, but proved them to have not been big enough. A couple weeks before the live-action series released, showrunner and former Entertainment Weekly editor Albert Kim and the lead child actors for the series were interviewed by, shocker of shocks, Entertainment Weekly. And in that article, Guy Yundio Tarbell, the actress who plays Katara, is quoted as saying,
I feel like we also took out the element of how sexist Sokka was. I feel like there were a lot of moments in the original show that were iffy.
After this quote, the Entertainment Weekly article then goes on to cite lines like this one, where Sokka displays a sexist view of women in the original series.
Girls are better at fixing pants than guys, and guys are better at hunting and fighting and stuff like that.
The article then goes on to cite, quote, entire Reddit threads to argue that fans found Sokka incredibly sexist and problematic as a result. Yet, the article leaves out critical context. Let's, for example, watch the rest of that clip.
It's just the natural order of things.
All done with your pants, and look what a great job I did.
Here we can see that Sokka's sexism isn't just put on display in part of the series, but instead is immediately challenged by the woman in the scene, Katara. On top of that, the entire Reddit threads that the article cites was one person 4 years ago intrigued by how Sokka, despite being sexist, got some of the ladies. 'Cause heaven knows my boy got some. Speaking of, if you actually looked through the Reddit thread, you can find that 4 years ago, there were many people commenting that the reason Sokka got so much was because he learned from his encounters with other women, underlining how growing from his sexism was a critical part of his character arc within the original show. Take, for example, the early 4th episode of the animated series where the gang visits Kyoshi Island. In the episode, Sokka repeatedly displays a chauvinistic and sexist attitude. Yet, the show itself displays this within the episode itself as something that Sokka needs to grow out of and repeatedly challenges him to do so. The episode opens up with that scene that I showed earlier, establishing Sokka's ingrained assumption of the delineations between men and women's work and the biological essentialism that he takes as natural that is implied within his statements. After later that episode being captured by the all-women Kyoshi warriors, Sokka presumes it must have been men who kidnapped them. Because of course girls couldn't be strong enough to get one over on him.
Who are you? Where are the men who ambushed us?
There were no men. We ambushed you.
Wait a second, there's no way a bunch of girls took us down.
Later, Sokka, grumbling about having been beaten by girls, showcasing his mild emasculation at that feeling, intrudes in on the Kyoshi warriors' training, assuming it must be dance lessons. That women must be dancing because it is inherently their place.
Girls. Sorry, ladies, didn't mean to interrupt your dance lesson. I was just looking for somewhere to get a little workout.
Despite his attempts to mansplain how to fight, he gets his ass handed to him by my gal Suki.
Now, this may be a little tough, but try to block me. Good.
Eventually, Sokka dons the Kyoshi armor and makeup in order to learn how the Kyoshi fight so that he can learn how to be a better warrior from the women.
It feels a little girly.
It's a warrior's uniform. You should be proud. The silk thread symbolizes a brave blood that flows through our veins. The gold insignia represents the honor of the warrior's heart.
Bravery and honor.
Hey, Sokka. Nice dress.
At this moment, despite his embarrassment, Sokka is actively choosing to take on what he sees as feminine traits, like wearing dresses and makeup, in order to do something that he views as masculine, fighting. This underscores him slowly learning that these concepts of masculine and feminine are not intrinsically separate, nor, more importantly, opposing.
Girls, come quickly!
Hey, I'm not whatever.
Even more subtly, though, in this scene, we see Suki not just as a narrative tool for Sokka's growth, but as her own person with her own feelings. When Sokka does beat her in one moment, she plays it off.
I fell on purpose to make you feel better.
I got you. Admit I got you.
Okay, it was a lucky shot.
As a result, we see that the pridefulness that Sokka displays is also within Suki, just not filtered through sexism as it is with Sokka. This is the show showing us how men and women are both human, even outside of Sokka's character arc. It also is the show allowing us to see Suki as a flawed person on her own terms, giving her depth beyond just being a narrative tool for Sokka. Thus, it's the show, despite centralizing on a male character, allowing women to have agency as well. Sokka, at the end of the episode, learns to grow as a warrior, but more importantly as a human being who sees Suki and women more generally as whole people, not just objects to be relegated to specific gendered roles. Sokka hasn't broken down all of his sexism in a single 22-minute episode. He still displays chauvinistic attitudes later on in the series, but it's an early episode to set up the series-long arc of him overcoming these issues bit by bit.
The framing of Tarbell's quote,
and let me be entirely fair here, that Entertainment Weekly article did not do the show any favors in how it presented the actor's out-of-context quotes alongside other quotes like, "more weight with realism in every way," as if sexism is somehow not realistic, ultimately led to a lot of backlash from fans of the original animated series towards the live-action remake, with them citing that the remake must not get the original show if they didn't understand this core arc for Sokka as a character. Which, to be fair to the live-action show, at the time, was an unfounded accusation.
while certainly talented, Tarbell is the actor, not the writer or showrunner. And her comments about the removal of sexism within the series might not have been reflective of what the writers intended or what's in the final edited show.
Even further, to be fair, it could have been that Sokka's sexism arc was replaced by another, just as exciting or even more dramatic character trait that could be explored and dissected that would reveal the larger themes of the Avatar: The Last Airbender live-action remake's ideas and concepts that it wanted to wrestle with. It wouldn't be that they just removed Sokka's sexism and still tried to play the episode the same exact way. Right? Right? Episode 2 of the live-action series adapts the same Kyoshi Island storyline, and it does it much worse. Instead of starting off with Sokka's sexism, the live-action episode starts with Sokka being concerned about duty and his responsibility to his own water tribe back home, instead of him believing that he has the ability to save the world alongside Aang and Katara.
We did our part. We saved him from the firebenders. Now it's time to go home. My duty, our duty, is to protect the village like Dad told us to.
They can protect themselves. Besides, what good is saving Wolf Cove if we don't save the world?
Katara, do you hear what you're saying? Save the world. Us.
There's absolutely no sexism displayed here in the character, despite scenes in episode 1 displaying his chauvinistic tendencies to take charge over the women around him.
I am Sokka, son of Hakoda, lord of, snow and ice.
Yet this attitude is never explicitly filtered through sexism within the show, so it goes mostly entirely unchallenged. Instead, these moments are used to paint this version of Sokka as unconfident and full of anxiety.
I'd hoped when he really had to prove himself that he'd do better. The truth is, not everyone is meant to have people's lives in their hands.
So when live-action Sokka meets Suki, to reflect this version of Sokka's current character arc, the show sets up Suki as a character with all the weight and responsibility of the Kyoshi warriors, in order to contrast her with Sokka, who is also a protector of his village, who feels that he can't live up to the duty and responsibility that is currently trying to be placed upon him to go alongside Aang as the Avatar.
So, how are you protecting your people if you're here?
What? I'm not. I mean, I am. I may not physically be there, but still. That is, I have to save the world first.
As a result, Sokka in this episode does not showcase any sexism towards Suki, but instead a desire to be just as strong as Suki, given she looks down on him as someone who supposedly abandoned his village. We still get a sense that Sokka is emasculated, but the show then is trying to build up Sokka from his emasculation instead of challenging him to understand where that sense of emasculization comes from. As a result, the conflict between Sokka and Suki in this episode becomes more about Sokka needing to learn to prove himself as a warrior and discovering that he is strong enough to save the world.
Compare how the live action show is presenting Suki in this scene compared to the similar scene from the animated series.
Okay.
Now, this may be a little tough, but try to block me. Good. Of course, I was going easy on you.
Of course.
Let's see if you can handle this!
The live action show makes Suki appear regretful at having beat Sokka, leading to her later trying to build him up, needing to demure herself to Sokka so he can feel more confident. The animated series, in contrast, presents Suki as powerful, and thus teaching Sokka a valuable lesson that girls are capable of fighting and winning, challenging Sokka's incorrect belief in his natural superiority as a man.
Even further, the episode takes a moment for Suki to look in on Sokka and see his sexy abs and body, highlighting not only Suki's physical attraction to him, but also to showcase to us, the audience, that we should find him physically strong as well, and thus believe that Sokka's insecurity is actually incorrect on his part, equating his physical strength with his desire to become a warrior. As a result, this version of Suki becomes a prop in order to bolster Sokka's development into the man that he was destined to be. As a result, the live-action show removes the storyline of Sokka's sexism and instead presents a sexist worldview, where Sokka's physical strength as a man is highlighted, and Suki is used as a tool to showcase his physical strength. Also, the series never has Sokka don the Kyoshi armor, which, as my fellow transgender filmmaker Mia Moore argued,
Netflix didn't put Sokka in the Kyoshi warrior's outfit because they don't want to be seen as supporting drag/cross-dressing in children's media, and that's way more misogynistic and conservative than having him call Suki a stupid, worthless girl right before she beats his ass.
And sadly, I believe that Mia is correct. Oh, by the way, as an aside here, you should get excited for Mia's upcoming sci-fi film, Again, coming later this year. Between Mia's film, Abigail Thorne's Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend, Jane Schobrun's I Saw the TV Glow, and my own Identities, it's gonna be a banger year for trans-genre art. Most tellingly, though, the live-action series removes this scene from the original episode.
Spit it out. What do you want?
I would be honored if you would teach me.
Even if I'm a girl?
I'm sorry if I insulted you earlier. I was wrong.
I cannot stress enough that that scene is exactly why you make this episode in the first place. The journey for the Avatar characters in the original animated show was for them to grow not just to be able to physically beat the Fire Nation, but also to philosophically challenge the imperialism and settler colonialism that it represents. The Fire Nation is a culture built on the idea of hierarchical supremacy meant to justify its colonialist ambitions, such as with its firebender supremacist rhetoric, saying that the firebenders are just naturally better, a concept that they themselves generate to validate their occupation of earthbender society.
We are the loyal sons and daughters of fire, the superior element.
The entire point of Sokka's arc in the animated series is for him to confront the hierarchical assumptions that he had ingrained in him from his own culture. The Southern Water Tribe did not have a racialized hierarchy like the Fire Nation, but it did have, on some level, ingrained biological essentialism of women's and men's roles and the differing values of each role that Sokka himself had internalized. For him to see Suki as both a warrior and a girl intentionally breaks down his belief that strength and womanhood are separate and opposing concepts, showing him that his sexist beliefs are a generated, not natural, hierarchy, thus allowing him to see where other hierarchies may have been generated in the world around him, such as with the Fire Nation in their colonialist ambitions.
I treated you like a girl when I should have treated you like a warrior.
I am a warrior. But I'm a girl, too.
Sokka's arc is consistently reinforced throughout the series, so when Sokka does face the Fire Nation at the end of the series itself and the end of the season, he presents not just a physical adversary, but a philosophical rival to the Fire Nation's racialized imperialism. And this is the arc for all of the animated Avatar characters. The original show is not just going around trying to say, look how horrible the Fire Nation is, we need to beat them up. Instead, the show is asking us to look at the ideology of this settler colonialist culture and how it dehumanizes not only the people it colonizes, but also the colonizers themselves, and asks us, through the arcs of its characters, how do we build something better? Instead of what the animated series episode does, which showcases to us that physical strength is not always what is necessary to become a better warrior, this episode highlights physical strength as a necessary part of being a strong warrior. The episode ends up arguing that Sokka shouldn't feel emasculated because he isn't a bender, but should just be stronger-willed.
Not being a bender means we have to be even better than benders. We can't reshape mountains and burn forests, so we have to fight with what we have.
The episode then becomes about Sokka needing to see his own prowess ability that he has innately, to see how special he really is, and not be afraid to take on the destiny that was put before him. Removing this early story in the live-action show and making it instead about Sokka learning to be a better warrior rather than overcoming sexism makes his story about who can fight stronger. It removes his story's ability at this early stage to challenge imperialism's core philosophy, that might makes right. Thus, by removing it, the live-action Avatar challenges nothing and ultimately reinforces an oppressor belief system. The show replaces Sokka's animated arc with one that says, to win, you need to punch harder, which is precisely what the Fire Nation believes.
By trying to make the live-action show, in showrunner Kim's own words, mass-market consumable by removing any aspects that might upset someone on a superficial level, be it someone who is upset at the mere appearance of sexism within a show even if it's challenged, or to not become the target of the right-wing culture war vilification of drag in children's media that is rooted in transphobia, the live-action series ultimately then presents a status quo point of view that reinforces the ingrained sexism and cis-heteropatriarchal assumptions of our modern-day politics, because these ideals are not seen as political, given that they are implicit biases within our society today.
The live-action show is essentially arguing for the philosophy of imperialism within the story of its supposed anti-colonialist heroes. The show fails to argue what the animated series did so well, that collective unity and the valuing of the capital O other is not only the best way to fight back against oppression, but more human and necessary if you wish to make something beyond it. This is a recurring issue throughout the live-action series. The core arc for Aang in the live-action show this season is for him to accept his power as the Avatar, which he is initially afraid of. And we know this because of exceptionally on-the-nose dialogue.
I don't want the responsibility. I'm scared of my power. I'm scared of being alone.
In episode 2, he gets a warning from a vision of the prior Avatar telling him that he has a responsibility to be the Avatar, even to the detriment of his ability to live his own life. He has a destiny, he has power, that he has a responsibility and right to wield. Death will naturally be a part of his wielding of righteous power, but it is still right that he does it all the same and not be afraid of it, the show argues at least.
Run away from your responsibilities again, and even more will be hurt. Being the Avatar means putting your duties above all else, even your life.
And this seemed to be a critical point for showrunner Kim to get across, as he's constantly quoted in Entertainment Weekly about how he desired to show the power of the Avatar throughout the season.
We drew upon elements of what happens when he meets Roku in the original series and gave it to Kyoshi, because we needed that element early in our series, to see the power of the Avatar.
Conversely though, the animated series always presented Aang's wielding of the Avatar power with a hint of horror and trepidation. Indeed, the past avatars that Aang talks with throughout that series are shown to have misused their Avatar power. The Avatar 2 iterations prior, Kyoshi, sundered the land in her fury, leading to numerous problems the next generation. Avatar Roku was a pacifist and never stood up to the Fire Nation's expansionism, allowing the Fire Nation attack that sets off this series to occur. Thus, the animated series presents the Avatar's power, both used and non-used, as a philosophy to discuss between these two distinct representations. The show argued that the use of power and might does not always make right, but also it argues that resisting oppression is essential lest you become neutral in the face of violence. Therefore, the use of power in some form is sometimes justified. Yet the live-action series actively, in Kim's own words, compresses Kyoshi and Roku's stories into Kyoshi alone. And then she's presented within this show as arguing for simple usage of power rather than a balance between the understanding that violent power and pacifism are two sides of a coin used to enable harm. By doing this, instead of showcasing the dual issue of wielding or not wielding power within a leadership position, the live-action show instead says the Avatar needs to be strong and punch things good. It's the same thing that happened with Sokka. The live-action show is saying that both of these characters have a duty to protect the world. They're the hero of the hero's journey, refusing the call but soon accepting it to become very special boys. Both Sokka and Aang are presented as people with no real issues other than the fear of using their power that they were given innately to its fullest. As a result, the show implies that those who are oppressed are weaker or are just fearful of using power, which is a viewpoint of the oppressor that the show is supposedly about taking down.
I want to be very clear here though, I don't think the show or Kim is overtly arguing that the Fire Nation, or vicariously its expansionist imperialism, is correct. And to be fair to the show, from time to time it does overtly push back against its ideology, arguing that collective unity and friendship are what we are fighting for, rather than simply just fighting against the imperialism of the Fire Nation, mainly when it sticks to directly adapting the stories and points of views of characters from the original show.
You didn't do it on your own, so you didn't learn anything at all.
You were wrong. You can rely on your friends. And that's the only way I'm gonna save the world.
But when the live-action show changes these storylines, it often actively sands off their edges and leads to storylines that actively work against their messages because they are oversimplified or reinforce the status quo. Or at the very least, it dilutes them, such as with Avatar Roku only presenting a single fleeting line in counter to Kyoshi's might argument that she gets 5 whole minutes and an action sequence to reinforce.
But in addition to being a warrior, the Avatar must also be a diplomat.
The series lets her show and tell her ideology of might makes right, while only allowing the counter to have a few seconds to breathe. Similarly, the series, near the end, pays lip service to Sokka's true strength being his caring for his friends when he tells Katara to stand up to institutional sexism, in a story taken directly from the animated series.
No, what I'm trying to tell you is, go kick his ass.
But by having removed and altered the core build-up arc to that scene in ways that negate it, this payoff feels distant, detached, and unearned. Instead, the series wishes to focus more on adding scenes that look powerful or cool.
Yet, the worst choice the show makes is its first one actively made to differentiate this live-action adaptation from the animated series. The first episode of the live-action series begins with a 20-minute sequence showing the lead-up to the Fire Nation's genocide of the Airbenders 100 years prior to the show's main narrative, something that the original animated series show never depicted. Showrunner Kim argued that this was the one thing that he wanted to add in this adaptation that was not in the original.
But I felt it was important to see the event that creates the story of Avatar. The famous line is, "Everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked." I wanted to see that.
But the question that I have is, why do you want to see a genocide occurring? I'm not saying that you can't or shouldn't, but it's a weird thing to say that you want to see it without presenting a why you wanted to see it. Do you want to showcase its horrors? Do you want to add context to the storyline that you're telling? To just say that you want to see a genocide occurring on its own terms is kind of ghoulish. To be fair to Kim, he does kind of give a reason later on, where he states that he wanted to depict this violence because this is an adult show made for the kids who watched the series growing up. So now he argues that as adults, we can finally see the genocide. Yet this reason assumes numerous things. Firstly, it assumes that we, the audience as kids, always wanted to see the genocide, which is kind of a leap, and still makes me question why Kim wanted to see it. It also assumes that the only reason the genocide was not depicted in the original show was limits on what could be aired in front of kids. On top of that, it also assumes that to depict violent genocide is inherently adult. But I'd argue that the way the live-action series presents this genocide is childish compared to the animated series. While Kim never outright says it, if you watch the sequence, the entire point, it seems to me, behind Kim's desire to depict the Airbender genocide is for the show to get a chance to see Airbenders fighting. This sequence is all displayed as, yeah, look at this cool stuff happening, isn't it awesome? You know, the murder of children in an entire civilization. Even worse to my mind though, the way this genocide is filmed doesn't depict the events as all that tragic. It's just a vehicle for cool fight sequences. There's no commentary in the show on the horrors of this event. There's not even sad music. To be very clear, I'm not arguing that the show is saying genocide is cool. What I am arguing though is that it's presenting this genocide as cool visually as a result of its desire to show us the cool airbending fight sequences. Kim's impulse here is the same one that you see in numerous Star Wars fans and writers that leads to shows like Book of Boba Fett or Obi-Wan Kenobi. This desire to see nostalgic Star Wars characters from your childhood fighting because you thought it would look cool as a child when you mashed action figures together, back when you didn't have to think about a story that would give context or commentary on that violence. This, by the way, is why I kind of respect the Rogue One scene of Darth Vader. It still presents Vader as badass, but the scene is horrific and terrifying as he murders rebels. There's at least some commentary within that scene on Vader's actions. In contrast though, in Avatar, these sequences of genocidal violence just look badass. It's action figures being mashed together without really presenting any artistic point of view about that violence's context. And to my mind, that's really rather juvenile than adult. And I know some people will argue differently, which is why we need to talk briefly about why fascists and oppressors often love aesthetics, something that I spoke about in my and Aaron's video on Star Wars that released way back in December, which you should check out if you have a quick 6 hours to watch the best video on Star Wars that you'll ever watch. And I'm someone riddled with self-anxiety, so me praising my own work means you know it's good. We often see many right-wing conservatives in the United States and elsewhere argue that art should just be apolitical, that it should just present us with aesthetically pleasing images and comforting escapist stories that don't have deeper meaning or challenge us as viewers in any way.
It's not that they don't have commentary, they're commentary from top to bottom, but they hide their commentary behind this veneer of objectivity. And that veneer of objectivity is one of their great weapons. It's one of the most manipulative tactics that they have. And we thought, you know, there are people who want to hear the news. They want to hear the news with very little bias.
The curtains are blue and should stay blue, as they say. This is why fascists can watch Star Trek and miss its progressive politics, or how conservatives will watch Starship Troopers and miss that it is a parody of fascistic society's need to create and generate a capital O other to fuel a political machine that is fueled by the need for endless violence, because those conservatives are too caught up in how the bugs need to be murdered. It's because to them, art shouldn't present a point of view, and thus they deny when a point of view is very clearly present. These types of folks will only get upset when they see superficial visual appearances of something that challenges their preconceived biases, like a black person in a lead narrative role, that challenges their sometimes unconscious white supremacist worldview, rooted in things like colonialism or capitalism. So even when a show is deeply anti-colonialist, they'll claim it's just a fun kids show for kids because they don't really read any deeper into it. And that's intentional, because their inability to read deeper stops them from being capable of imagining anything outside of the status quo. This is why you'll often see conservative leaders attack academic institutions, especially art programs, as pointless. Their goal is to make people not be able to think too deeply about art, and instead revel in shallow, fleeting images of power symbolized by visuals of strength and physical grandeur. This is also why capitalism strip mines meaning from works of art like Avatar: The Last Airbender. These leaders wish to educate people simply to be enactors of capitalism, itself a form of evolved colonialism, rather than teach people to be thinkers or dreamers who could envision a world beyond the present now.
You're not supposed to be challenging kids with radical new ideas. You're supposed to be able to trust your kids in a culture. It's supposed to mean that any adult can trust their child with any other adult. You can send your kids to school and assume that they're not going to have radical gender and race theories shoved on them.
I'd highly recommend this video by Professor Bopper that goes into greater detail about how capitalism, itself an evolved form of colonialism as argued by folks like Cedric J. Robinson, intentionally works to harm our understanding of art, and how our impulse to just want escapist entertainment at all times, rather than seeing that art, whether it intends to have a message or not, always presents a point of view, even if that view is made seemingly invisible by it adhering closely to the status quo, is an impulse intentionally stoked by capitalist desires for us not to think deeply about alternatives to the system of exploitation and control that we live within. This is not me arguing that a desire to escape into fiction for comfort is a bad thing in and of itself. I've rewatched that one episode of Deep Space Nine too many times for me to think that.
Count to 4, count to 4.
But what I am saying is that art itself always has meaning regardless of what you go to it for. And that's something that we shouldn't actively try to avoid and deny every time that we engage with art. And in fact, we should be willing to engage with art in more rigorous and challenging ways more often.
And we can see the effect that this has on our ability to read art. The actor who plays Aang in the live-action show was quoted in the Entertainment Weekly article saying,
"I think the Airbender genocide is really cool. Well, no, not like that. I mean, it's not a good thing, but watching it is going to be sick."
Now, to be clear, I'm not here to attack the actor. He's a kid paid to do a job, and I think he did it rather well. But I think his words are just more emblematic of the takeaway that I think many, kids and adults alike, are intended to and may take away from the Fire Nation attack sequence, because it doesn't challenge the audience to actually think about anything beyond the surface-level meaningless spectacle sold to you as a product built on the strip-mined soul of the original work. In contrast, the animated series shows us the genocide through its aftermath.
And over there is where the bison would sleep, and... What's wrong? This place used to be full of monks and lemurs and bison. Now there's just a bunch of weeds. I can't believe how much things have changed.
Aang, 100 years after the genocide happened, sees the bodies of his loved ones and is visibly disturbed to the point of entering the Avatar state and nearly destroying everything around him. The series made a genocide that happened over 100 years ago within the story's narrative still feel fresh, raw, and immediate. And by doing so, the series showed how the horrors of settler colonialism still reverberate across generations. For these wounds are the foundation upon which empires are built and are never allowed to heal, to ever become scars. For these genocides are constantly revisited in the echoes of the oppressor states that they are built upon. The show also shows in this moment how these open wounds then cause more violence by those who are oppressed and hurt and harmed by it. The show then goes on to show how this mindset creates an endless loop of violence. And the 3-season-long story of the show is showcasing how much effort it takes to break that loop and how much learning and healing you have to do.
And I know how hard it is to lose the people you love. I went through the same thing when I lost my mom. Monk Gyatso and the other airbenders may be gone, but you still have a family.
Thus, the animated show, by depicting the genocide this way, made the past present and artistically displayed the horrific violence of an oppressive now. It showed how the oppressive present continually recreates itself through its unhealed wounds. Yet more importantly, this scene also speaks to the future. Aang and us as the audience see the death of what could have been, the life that Aang and so many other airbenders could have lived, the potential futures extinguished. If being able to dream of a different future is to imagine a world resistant to the dominant oppressive order of the present, then oppressive forces destroying those potential futures is a horror that locks us into the oppressive now, into consistently recreating an endless loop. The artistic depiction of genocide within the animated series is more meaningful, touching, and introspective in a way that motivates not only the entire series, but me as a viewer to want to say never again to the violence of settler colonialism. By depicting the genocide as simply a present event as the live-action show does, it locks it to the moment of the event, rather than showcasing how it echoes long after. The live-action show does have a brief moment where Aang looks at his dead past, but it's in the last 4 minutes of a cramped pilot episode instead of within a full 22-minute episode where it gets to breathe. And even then, in those 4 minutes, the live-action show uses this moment to show us how powerful Aang gets when he's angry, showing us his avatar state for the second time in a way that isn't depicted as terrifying as it was in the original animated series. Thus using this moment of showing the violent aftermath of an oppressor thought to ultimately uphold the values of an oppressor of needing to be strong.
The thing about losing everything is that that's when you learn how strong you really are. It's when you learn to fight.
To be fair to it, the live-action series does do a couple things rather well, most notably with Fire Nation characters. The series does seem to at least understand the abuse and intentional distrust and infighting that colonialist societies try to create within their own cultures, in order to continually enact cycles of abuse.
This isn't something you learn in a textbook. Little boys should know better than to play at war.
The show does display how these types of cultures try to kill the souls of those it tells are superior and should be oppressors, so that they then go on to enact that violence en masse towards others, teaching them to not value introspection or connection. We see this quite clearly in how Fire Lord Ozai, played by my boy Daniel Dae Kim, intentionally plays Azula and Zuko against each other.
Zhao didn't discover the Avatar, Zuko did. He's the one who displayed resilience and dedication, not self-serving flattery and coy whispers.
As well as retelling Zuko's arc of being abused by his father as Ozai works to instill a might makes right mentality and the devaluing of human life in his son.
You must be willing to give up the weak to make yourself strong. That is what makes us the Fire Nation. That is why we sacrifice the 41st Division. That is what you must do.
Honestly, this is the only storyline in the show that actually got an emotion out of me. I really felt for Zuko in these scenes, even if it was just a pale echo of his arc from the animated series. But it sucks that this ability for the show to empathize with and understand the harm that happens within hegemonic colonialist cultures was not coupled with an understanding of how that mentality works to reinforce itself within its cycle of violence narratives, such as deconstructing the idea that the weak simply need to become stronger in order to fight back against oppression.
Sometimes the weak can become stronger. Sometimes you just have to give them a chance.
To show how societies of settler colonialism are not just dehumanizing to those that it colonizes, but the colonizers themselves. How the system of oppressors and oppressed, while certainly much more traumatizing and worse for the oppressed, is a system that destroys everyone who is involved in its humanity. That to be the oppressor is itself a violence against oneself. Instead, the live-action show simply depicts Fire Nation bad in highly simplistic terms.
We can see that quite clearly in how the live-action show doesn't take the chance to update the mistakes of the original series, like with the character of Jet, which both series present as a violent, unreasonable, anti-colonialist terrorist, who is presented as almost equally culpable in the cycle of violence, instead of taking the time to show the nuance that men like Jet, while certainly wrong for their willingness to murder civilians and should be criticized, are not as complicit or culpable in the inaction and continuation of mass violence as those that they are fighting against, even as their oppressors use men like Jet to justify escalating violence. Men like Jet are often intentionally propped up by settler colonialist cultures because their blind rage at all those associated with oppressors, be they civilian or military alike, allows the colonizers to argue for further expansionism. Instead, both shows present Jet as an isolated entity who should be held individually responsible for his actions, rather than presenting an understanding of how his trauma and rage is an intentionally generated part of the system of harm.
What about the people in the town? Won't they get wiped out too?
Look, Duke, that's the price of ridding this area of the Fire Nation.
In fact, by compressing Jet's storyline into 2 episodes along with 3 other storylines from the animated series instead of giving it focus, the live-action show arguably does Jet's storyline worse than the already somewhat problematic version in the original animated series.
The live-action show is dead set on trying to ignore the past, and instead focusing on just action and the present now. It's one of the final lines of this entire season.
Aang, this is war. There's going to be losses. There's going to be pain. None of that is your fault.
And the Firebenders aren't giving up. We have to prepare for whatever they throw at us next. And so stop worrying about the past and start thinking about what you still have to do.
I think I understand something Gyatso was trying to tell me. He told me, let go of the past, or I'll never have a future.
But in truth, to be able to fight the dominant order of now requires us to carry the bodies of our dead in our past into battle with us. It is about knowing what we have lost and feeling that weight and understanding what we are fighting to stop that helps us be able to build what comes after.
You, me, and Appa. We're all that's left of this place. We have to stick together.
To fight simply for the sake of doing it, to focus solely on the now, as the live-action show states, removes our ability to look towards a horizon of hope and possibilities. Instead, it just asks us to recreate the same endless loop of violence. The live-action show is just trying to be nostalgic and apolitical rather than using Avatar to say anything about today. Yet by being apolitical, it reinforces the status quo. The idea of our society of might makes right, not just within the context of the series itself, but within the world that Avatar: The Last Airbender is going out into, our world right now.
By not analyzing the original series themes and trying to be straightforward apolitical entertainment that doesn't say anything meaningful, and by adding in more violence simply for the sake of it being more, in its eyes, adult, the live-action show ends up not challenging the ideals that our society today in America, where the show is written and mainly aimed at, shares with that of the Fire Nation, given the racial capitalism and neo-colonialism this country still enacts, and the settler colonialism and slavery it was built upon. This is not something I'm saying every show has to do, but it is something the original show attempted to do, imperfect as it was, because dear God, it had problems, and Korra seasons 1 and 2 was even worse in that regard. The live-action show attempts to really say nothing, and as a result just reinforces the core assumptions of boarded identitarian politics, strength, and individualism that the philosophies of neoliberalism and colonialism are built upon.
When conservatives rail against wokeness, what they mean is that they are angry about seeing anything that disrupts their worldview, that stands up to the status quo, that dares to imagine possible worlds and futures beyond this present oppressive now that they try to make appear as past, present, and future, and as if it's the only way the world can be.
Come take part with us in building the future. In fact, if you go to dailywire.com/buildthefuture right now, you can become a dailywire.com member. If you want to, because I know the price is high, if you want to save a little money, you could use promo code BUILDTHEFUTURE, and we'll give you 45% off.
And honestly, Avatar, the live-action show, gives them exactly what they want. It only regurgitates a nostalgic, superficial remembrance of Avatar: The Last Airbender, not an actual look at what it had to say. And by doing so, it tries to tell us that the original animated series didn't mean anything either. The live-action series is trying to erase our memory of the past, to try and tell us that the original show was just as meaningless as this one and only capable of presenting power and control as the only options. I once got dragged on Twitter for a tweet that I wrote that said, "Leftism isn't about winning." Certain online voices complained that saying this meant that I was about losing, that leftists like me would continue to lose to fascists and conservatives if we didn't focus solely on fighting back against them. But the point that I was trying to make was that pushing back against oppression means fighting for a world beyond them, beyond the oppressive status quo. Because if we don't do that, we fall into its trap.
Our lives have to depend on winning. We can only win by winning.
We create an us versus them instead of fighting for the collective we of a future that does not yet exist, that has moved beyond the generated borders of identitarian politics. As a result, we become a tool for the oppressor to fight against, a generated endless fight that only feeds their loop.
I think that it's the future that's actually only being dreamed of by a tiny segment of radicalized extreme left. We'll be challenging them in commerce. We'll be challenging them in news and commentary. We'll be challenging them in entertainment. We'll be challenging them in kids' content. We believe in our Daily Wire audience. We believe that they will subscribe. In fact, if you're watching right now and you're not a dailywire.com subscriber, I'm asking you, not for a donation, I'm asking you, not begging, I'm asking you, go buy something of real value. Go buy a membership to the Daily Wire. Go buy a membership to Jeremy's Razors. Put your money where your mouth is.
That allows them to control our story, for them to say that the only story is oppressor and oppressed, and that we can only change who is on top. To create a vision of a future beyond that story is incredibly hard. And that's why works like the original Avatar: The Last Airbender are so worthwhile and meaningful. It was a show that taught us that, in the end, we don't need to recreate cycles of violence, but can endeavor to move beyond them. Works of art like that help teach us that to choose to fight systems of oppression are necessary, but are only a first step on the path towards building a better tomorrow. We need to know that a future that destroys the borders our society of today has created to tell us that we are different, higher and lower, can be made, but that it is a horizon that needs to be walked towards together or not at all, with a full understanding that we are building something new, not something already present, because the present is oppressive. Apologies, sorry, I didn't realize that I was getting on my leftist high horse preaching pants for that moment. Let me just take those off for a second. Now I'm not wearing anything but underwear, so you can stop taking me seriously because you really never should have. That's on you. The ultimate point that I'm trying to get at is that the live action show not only misunderstands, but actively works against what the original series was trying to say. And perhaps that's why the original animated series creators left it. The live action show had the potential to take that story and update it for the modern day by doing three things. First, it could have done stuff in live action that was not possible in animation. Second, it could have fixed issues with the original series. Because heaven knows that while Sokka's sexism is pertinent to the original story's message, the original work was definitely not free from colonialist storytelling impulses, something that my friend Princess Weeks pointed out in her own excellent video that you should go check out. And third and finally, the live action show could have updated the original series' message for a more modern context. Ultimately, the live action show superficially does the first two and definitely doesn't do the third. In fact, it actively removes the original show's message. And as a result, it's not just a pointless show, but one that actively is in conflict with the original show's intention. At the very least, Momo is still adorable. Ah! Oh my god, what are they doing to Momo? Ah! Hey there, interwebs, I hope you enjoyed this video. This was something I didn't intend to do, but I had a lot of thoughts after watching the live-action Avatar series. Before you go, quick thing to just state, I do have a really big video coming up in the next couple weeks that looks at a huge piece of anti-trans propaganda put out by one of the biggest right-wing outlets in the world, one that is itself funded by a right-wing cult. So I am going into all of that. It's a fascinating story, if slightly depressing, and we're going to get into all of the wild conspiracy theory stuff that goes into it. That being said, that video is a huge undertaking, and I'm also at the same time finishing up my science fiction film Identities that is going to come out in just a few short months. Quite literally today that I'm filming this, we finished off our VFX spotting session. We still have a lot of work to do for visual effects and sound design and music and all of that, but we are closing in on the home stretch, so I am so freaking pumped. If you haven't heard about it, it's a movie that I made starring many wonderful, amazing folks, such as John Delancey from Star Trek The Next Generation, Abigail Thorne from Philosophy Tube, and Maggie Mae Fish from here on YouTube as well. It's something that I'm just so excited to get out to all of you, and something that I hope mirrors a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about in this video. That all being said though, between Identities, this other video project, and other projects that I have coming down the line that I am super excited about, including maybe some other fiction work that I'm hoping to have come out beyond this year, I am doing a lot of work right now, and the way that I am able to sustain myself between all of these large projects, because heaven knows that YouTube does not pay my bills, is through my Patreon. Please, if you do like my videos, if you do like my work, if you want to support me making this and other stuff like Identities, Patreon does really help me pay the bills. And if you want to get your name in videos, get videos early, get some exclusive videos and content like interviews that I do with some cool folks, please go support me over there. It really does mean a lot. It allows me to pay all of my bills. I would not be able to do this without all of you. And being frank, there's been a lot of big bills lately. For many of you who don't know, my cat Newt recently very tragically passed away, and sadly, death is not free in this country, which really sucks. So that's been some big bills, as well as some other medical expenses. I've had to have some surgery and stuff like that, but I am doing all okay. I will be able to pay for it, but any help on Patreon does help with all of that. So thank you so much for those of you who are able to help me there. If you are not able to help me there, totally fine. I totally appreciate it. I hope you all live long and prosper, my friends, and take care of yourselves. Mwah.
Joe Herman Hold, Carrie Ellen Foss, Niels Osborne Ozenholm, Arklesair, Barbie Ann Rounds, Sarah Montgomery, Jack McCallan, Stephen Kleinard, Hannah Friedrich, Christian Hurst, Jazz Miss, Randy Thompson, Samuel Howard, Quite Bearish, Marshall Nye, Rose Conley, Elton Tivy, Courtney Ray Kelly, Dark Archon, Anti-Kate 808, Tara Rose, Lily Blaney, Vincent Ellington, Amada Kaiba, Miranda Keitel, Zane Schussler, Michael Woolnutz, Matt Chung, Alex Miller, Nyasa Mayer, Super Desi, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Todd Verling, Meadow Whisperer, Joseph Dewey, Semi Joe Retro, Jem Shin, Iron, Chris Showers, Lily Gray, Angela Hendricks, Joelle Guillory, Luna, James Krivda, Shep Alderson, Dominic Noble, Weirdy Beardy, Kaylee Lang, Sonia Nero Perdo, Nathan Fraughton, Farangato, Quattro, Ryan Hunter, Freelith George Holstrom, W. Randy Edie, Sean Sullivan, Kevin Freitag, Sergeant Bradshaw, Epsilon is greater than, Fly and Kata, Bob Saget, Verdux Kai, Troy Stull, Blue, Craig and David, Teague Wilson, Scott Russell, Stephen Richardson, John Weatherby, Brits Krieg, Carry On, Casual Observer, Kay Liss, Patricia Kromtic, Jess Johnson, Kurt Mullen, Prince of Void, Sarah Lemerow, Jason Knott, Teresa Bailey, Joanne the Wretch Witch, Hope, Jason Tuliana, Ruben Gines, Shield Maiden 4444, Elizabeth Christensen, The Mighty Jinjo Joe, Beatrix Purvis, Matthew Craiglow, Roy Negby, Grumpy Dragon 75, Emma Ramirez, Melody Ann Winters Good, Sasha M, Damian Rice, Valerie Blackbird, Melinda Walters, Kylara Auroral, Sean Piper, Mark H. Williams, author, Jade Persuades, Mark H. Williams, author, Adam Smatcher, Jades Persuades, David Dema, Tyler Edwards, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Blueberry Hill, Sarah Bystam, Teresa, Doherty Lucero, Laura Demereau, Penile Sparing Vaginoplasty, Celestial Dawn, DM Collins, Tori Perez, Caroline Clark, Crit Max, Lev Goodwin, Fan, Callum McLeod of Clan McLeod, Michael Weber, Lou Toussaint, Henry Pierce, Tom G311, Julie Werner, and Chai Cat Midnight Sky. Mwah. Love you all, adore you all.